Okay, so this is a continuation on a list of presentations that I'm trying to compile discussing ancient Greek pederasty and their structure for youth development, particularly within the male population. So in a previous presentation, I made this and other slides to kind of illustrate why they had the structure they had. They had the pederastic system, which went alongside the regular public education system, but you'll have to understand in ancient Greece, public education was not guaranteed. Citizenship was also not guaranteed. And so for a lot of lower class civilians who might or might not have had voting and property rights, alternative means of citizenship acquisition, especially for their children, were quite desirable. And so they came up with systems like this that would allow for their children to have a future, even if they themselves could not provide that future. So in the grand scheme of things, they were focused on a lot of the same core principles, whether it was in public education or in the pederastic system or some other system. It was mainly developmental. The idea being that if you could develop the child, the young male, into a proper Greek citizen in broad strokes, then throughout the course of his experiences going through adulthood, he would begin to adopt the ideal Greek ethos. And so they broke them down, as you see in this diagram that I created. This is essentially how they went about developing their youth. They broke each of these, of course, into its individual segments, mentally, physically, and emotionally developing the children. And they had a number of different standards that they were using to determine whether or not the child was developed in each particular portion. Mentally, of course, they wanted to show that they were the predominant culture within the Mediterranean, and they did this by ensuring that not only were their children capable of surviving whatever came to them, but they were also capable of thriving more so than their neighbors to the north, the Germanic tribes, or to the east, the Mesopotamian ethnic groups, or even to the west. You know, at a certain point, they began competing with what would become the Romans, and it was imperative that their people be on top, and that meant that every technological, every educational, academic pursuit they had to excel in. Going to physical, of course, they wanted their men to be as strong as possible, but strength was not the only physical concern. They needed to be capable of rapid recovery, and they also needed to understand how their bodies worked and how everyone else's bodies worked. If you think about society, you can't have a society where every single person is the same, even if you wanted to. And they did everything they could to ensure that all of the men in their society were strong and capable, but we're not all equal. And where one man is more physically developed, another might be more mentally developed, or another might be more emotionally developed. And so understanding that there were anatomical differences between people and understanding how to use those anatomical differences to the benefit of the group, of society, was one of the main strengths that the Greeks really embodied throughout their thousands of years of dominance within the Mediterranean. And then, of course, emotionally, they had to be capable of introspection and foresight and so forth. Otherwise, none of the physical and mental attributes that they prided themselves in having would have made much of a difference in their practical expression. Thinking more on lines of what we deal with today, we see now that there are a lot of young males and adult men in our society that just don't really have any drive. They don't have a real purpose. They don't have any understanding of where they are in society and why that's important. The Greeks made sure to emphasize that a man's role in society far supersedes a man's status. And this is actually in the different Greek epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey and so forth. You see this as a recurring theme. It doesn't matter if you're a king or if you're just a soldier or a farmer or a baker, whatever you are, your role in society being fulfilled is much more important than whatever the status symbol of that role is. And so I think if we were to have that in our modern society, we would really do quite well in getting rid of all of the class strife and so forth between each other. So, of course, the Greeks were not the only ones that had their own pedagogical means. Other cultures throughout the world have had different pedagogical standards. And this is I borrowed this slide from the pederastic presentation that I did, but I just wanted to point out that the Greeks did a lot to ensure that the youth developed, and they felt that it was paramount for social success that the Greek strategy of development be applied across the board, that it not be applied just in public schools or just in the Eromenos system or just in some other system, that every single outlet for male youth in ancient Greek society structured itself around that triad of mental, physical, and emotional well-being. Other societies from ancient times all the way through modern day have not prioritized this holistic development in the same fervor that the Greeks did. And so we see that there are a lot of downsides to cultures that claim to care about youth development, but then do things that are contrary to youth development. And the ancient Greeks were aware that they could too fall into the trap of saying things that sounded nice, but then doing things that were actually detrimental to the development of the youth and the overall sustainability of society. And so to ensure that they did not deviate from the path, they had baked into their Eromenos system, as well as their other pedagogical systems, public education and so forth in ancient Greece. They had baked in this sense that once a male became of age to become a citizen, it wasn't good enough just to pass tests and to prove in theory that they were able to do these things. They had to go on and for the rest of their lives prove over and over again that they were citizens and that they were dedicated to the teachings that they had been indoctrinated to believe during their time as male youth, whether it was within or outside of the Eromenos system. Men that did not adhere to those ideals were often censored, shunned, outcast, and sometimes even murdered. There is record that men who persistently abused and neglected male youth, especially those that were within their custody as erastes, were shunned and even murdered for those failings. And it reflected very poorly on an erastes if the eromenos did not develop properly. Conversely, if the eromenos did quite well, it was quite a favorable thing to be known as that now adult male's former erastes. And so the social pressure was very high for men to not only develop, but then to exude that ideal Greek male persona throughout society, whether as an erastes or just as a citizen. But of course, in doing so, they had to interact with other male youth and show them the path that they had taken, and not to diminish the complexity of the relationship, but when you're expected to take everything you've known from your childhood and apply it not only to your own adulthood but to the childhood of the generations behind you, that's a very intense process. It's a very introspective process, and of course it provides development on both sides of that relationship, and it's conceivable that such a relationship would become incredibly intimate. Now, I'm not saying all this to encourage the Eudemonious system, just like I said in the past video that I've posted so far, and I'm going to keep going with these because this is a topic that I've thought about for as long as I've been an adult. You know, it goes without saying that it was a very complicated system, and now it's an archaic, obsolete system. I'm not saying we should bring it back, but what I am saying is that what we have right now is not ideal. We have pedophilia, and that is, for a lot of reasons, very detrimental to society. And then we also have a failing education system that does not care about the mental, physical, or emotional development of youth, boys or girls. So, you know, if we're not going to have a good education system, if we're not going to support civic institutions, if we're not going to get rid of the scourge of pedophilia, in fact, it's getting worse and worse every year, we need to have these discussions. And it's a shame that we have to have a discussion like this, and I wish I didn't have to be the one to bring it up, but I mean, it's got to happen one way or another. We have to address the elephant in the room, and we have to do it not because it's convenient, but because every year more and more male youth, in my focus, but youth in general, are being brought into a world that is not prepared to help them develop and be successful. Ancient Greece made this a priority, and they had a sister system for female youth, but the Eudemonious system was the male youth process of development, and it worked quite well. So anyway, I hope that this video, like the last one, spurs up discussion. We need to find solutions, and we need to get out of our comfort zone when we're talking about these issues, because they're uncomfortable issues and they're facing our youth every day.